Trump made Iran lose its mind by getting from China the move Tehran feared most. Beijing, the main buyer of Iranian oil, appeared alongside Washington, demanding stability in the Strait of Hormuz and blocking the nuclear adventure of the Ayatollah regime. This Friday, May 15, 2026, the scene in Beijing weighed more than any threat made by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps because Xi Jinping was not just shaking hands with Donald Trump. He was showing that China does not want to pay the price for Iranian blackmail at sea. The Tehran regime spent years believing it could intimidate ships, pressure global trade, and still count on Chinese money coming in from oil sold at a discount. But Trump turned things around without lengthy speeches. He put the crisis in front of Xi, exposed Iran as a problem for China's own economy, and left the Revolutionary Guard. The Revolutionary Guard reacted by shouting with military exercises, threats, and a show of force. That's where the desperation comes from. Iran realized that its biggest buyer started seeing keeping Hormuz open as a necessity, not as a favor. I'll tell you all about this in a moment, but right now, you'll want to be subscribed to the channel to stay well informed. Real-time information with the best journalistic quality you've ever seen. Milson Alves, the benchmark for credibility. The change didn't come out of sympathy, it came out of interest. China needs energy, needs ships moving, and needs to prevent Iran from turning Hormuz into a platform for threats. When Trump sat down with Xi in Beijing, what was at stake wasn't just a photo between two leaders. It was an attempt to take away from Iran the feeling that it could close one of the world's most important routes and still keep selling oil as if nothing had happened. The move hit Tehran because China is the main lifeline for Iranian oil. Data cited by Reuters shows that China bought an average of 1.38 million barrels per day of Iranian oil in 2025, more than 80% of the oil shipped by Iran. This oil mainly ended up in independent Chinese refineries, attracted by the discount since American sanctions left Tehran with few major buyers. That's why Trump's meeting with Xi was so troubling. If the purchase is tightened, if stricter demands are made, or free passage through Hormuz is required, the Revolutionary Guard loses money, loses influence, and loses its narrative of strength. The Iranian response followed the same usual pattern: tough talk, military gestures, and an attempt to show control. The Revolutionary Guard launched an exercise called Commander Mars, while officials connected to the regime promised a response to any aggression. But this staging shows more nervousness than strength. When a nation truly despises, it despises. When a regime starts to rely on military exercises to appear alive, it's because it knows the game has changed. Iran was not being pressured only by Washington. It was watching China, its major buyer, ask for passage, demand stability, and look for alternatives. The most humiliating point for Tehran is that even Chinese ships started to receive special treatment to cross the Strait of Hormuz. It was reported that Iran began to allow the passage of some Chinese vessels. After diplomatic requests from Beijing, a Chinese supertanker carrying 2 million barrels of Iraqi oil managed to cross after being stuck in the region for more than 2 months. This shows the Iranian contradiction. Beijing depends on oil, depends on maritime security, and cannot accept that the Revolutionary Guard decides who passes, when they pass, and how much they pay. From then on, Iran realized that its position was not so comfortable. The regime could rail against Washington, but it couldn't ignore that China also wanted Hormuz open. The American pressure was still accompanied by sanctions. Before the meeting, Washington had already targeted Chinese companies linked to the trade of oil and materials used by Iran. This made Beijing publicly uncomfortable, but it also made one thing clear: doing business with Tehran became more expensive. China likes to buy cheap, but it doesn't like to buy trouble, and Iran became exactly that. A cheap supplier, but surrounded by war, blockade, maritime risks, sanctions, and the threat of interruption. The Chinese giant Sinopec itself had already made that calculation. In March 2026, Reuters reported that the state-owned company did not intend to buy oil and was seeking support to use internal reserves, as well as to buy more oil. Saudi through the port of Yanbu in the Red Sea. This is not ideological rhetoric, it's economic survival. When the world's largest refinery looks for an alternative outside Iran, the message is simple. Tehran has lost its status as a reliable supplier. They might even sell at a discount, but no discount makes up for idle ships, expensive insurance, American blockades, and the risk of war. The Revolutionary Guard has always tried to sell the idea that it controls fear. They use militias, small ships, threats at sea, fiery speeches, and pressure on trade routes. But this strategy depends on one thing: the big buyers continuing to pretend they don't see it. Trump broke that comfort zone. By bringing Xi into a conversation about the nuclear Hormuz, he pushed China out of the shadows. Beijing may not become a formal ally of the United States, but it can no longer treat Iran as just a simple energy partner. Now, Tehran is also a risk to the Chinese economy. History shows that major turning points don't only happen when shots are fired. In 1972, Richard Nixon went to China and opened a channel that changed the balance of the Cold War. That move didn't turn Beijing into a friend of the United States overnight, but it weakened the Soviet position because it forced Moscow to face a new reality. Washington knew how to use diplomacy to separate adversaries. Now Trump is trying to apply a similar logic against Iran. He doesn't need to make Xi love Washington. He just needs to make Xi understand that Iran is disrupting oil flows, shipping, and the stability that China needs to grow. When the sponsor starts calculating the cost of the protege panics. Other nations are already taking action so they won't be held hostage to Iran's whims. The United Arab Emirates is speeding up projects to increase its oil export capacity through Fujairah, outside the most sensitive point of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia is emerging as an alternative for Chinese refineries via the Red Sea. Malaysia and Indonesia have started facing the specter of Iranian oil transfers near their waters, in operations that try to hide the origin and circumvent sanctions. When several nations look for alternative routes, reserves, and suppliers, it's because the Tehran regime has lost the confidence it was trying to project. The Iranian regime may keep beating its chest, but its weakness shows when it has to choose between maintaining the threat or keeping the buyer. Trump understood this point and used Beijing as leverage. China didn't change out of goodwill. It changed because closing Hormuz hurts China itself. And when Tehran realized that its biggest buyer started demanding order, the show of strength became a sign of desperation. I'm Milson Alves, an international affairs specialist, and my purpose is to keep you well informed with the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the Milson Alves community.